The storm had been brewing for hours, casting a pallor over the afternoon that made time feel like it had stopped. From the comfort of our family room, I watched the rain lash against the windows, the wind howling like a lost soul. The sky was a uniform gray, and every once in a while, a flash of lightning would illuminate the trees, their branches thrashing wildly. It was the kind of day meant for staying indoors, wrapped in blankets with hot cocoa steaming in mugs. My family, nestled in different corners of the house, seemed content to do just that. My wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen, experimenting with a new recipe, her laughter occasionally floating through the house as she chatted with our teenage daughter, Emily. Emily, in turn, was sprawled on the couch, texting her friends about everything and nothing, her face lit by the soft glow of her phone screen. Our youngest, Daniel, had created a fort out of blankets and cushions in the living room and was deeply engrossed in his fantasy world, his quiet narration barely audible over the storm outside. It was a picture of domestic serenity, a tableau of normalcy framed by the chaos of the weather. But then, as if the storm was not enough to disturb the peace, the phone rang. It was an old landline phone we kept out of necessity rather than preference, relegated to a corner of the room and rarely used. The sound was jarring in the otherwise quiet house, breaking the rhythm of rain and wind. I exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, who looked puzzled, her hands dusted with flour. Emily barely noticed, lost in her digital conversations, and Daniel was too deep in his imaginary world to care. I picked up the receiver, expecting a telemarketer, or perhaps one of those automated scam calls. "Hello?" I said, my voice echoing slightly in the emptiness that followed. There was no reply, just a faint crackle of static, like whispers from the other side of a long, dark tunnel. "Hello?" I repeated, louder this time, but the line went dead with a soft click. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the storm interfering with the lines. Yet, a curious unease settled in the pit of my stomach. Returning to the couch, I tried to dismiss the incident as a mere blip, a minor annoyance. But when the phone rang again, not 5 minutes later, the unease resurfaced, this time accompanied by a prickle of something colder, more insidious. Sarah looked up from her baking, her eyes meeting mine with a question unspoken. I answered the call again, and once more, silence greeted me, thicker, more oppressive than before. The wind howled louder outside, and the lights flickered briefly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I hung up, but the sensation of being watched, being observed by something unseen, refused to shake. Trying to mask my discomfort, I asked Sarah if her family had planned to call, perhaps checking in on us because of the storm. She shook her head, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression thoughtful, yet unconcerned. As the afternoon stretched on, the calls continued, each one identical to the last. The relentless ringing, the same static-filled silence, the empty line. My family began to notice my growing agitation, the way I would pause, listen, then replace the receiver with a slightly firmer grip each time. Emily teased me about a secret admirer, her teenage humor a brief balm for the tension simmering beneath my skin. Daniel, oblivious, continued his play, his imagination a continent away, from the oddities of adult worries. It wasn't until the evening, when the storm reached its crescendo, that things escalated. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times in quick succession, a frantic insistence that could not be ignored. On the third ring, the lights went out completely. The house plunged into darkness, save for the sporadic illumination provided by the lightning outside. I groped my way to the phone, my heart pounding in sync with the thunder. "Who is this?" I demanded into the receiver, a futile attempt to assert control. For a moment, the line crackled louder, filling my ear with a cacophony of sound. Then, the static cleared, and there was a voice, soft, almost a whisper, yet unmistakably familiar. "Dad?" it said, a single word that sent a chill racing down my spine. I froze, the receiver slipping in my sweaty grip. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Yet, the voice was his, my father's, who had passed away over a year ago. I had been there, by his side, when he took his last breath, and I had felt the weight of loss, the finality of death. Yet here, now, his voice was as clear as if he stood in the room beside me. Silence stretched on the line, the world outside reduced to a distant roar of elements. "Dad," the voice repeated, tinged with an urgency that both terrified and compelled me. "Can you hear me?" My voice trembled as I answered, "Yes, I hear you." There was a pause, a brief, static-laden moment before he spoke again. "I need you to listen," he said, his tone grave, laden with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "There's something you need to know." In the darkness, my family gathered around, sensing the gravity of the moment, though unaware of the specifics. Sarah placed a hand on my arm, grounding me, while Emily and Daniel huddled close, their eyes wide with curiosity and fear. "What is it? What do you need to tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The connection wavered, and I feared I would lose him, lose this impossible, fragile reconnection. But the voice persisted, cutting through the static like a lifeline. "There are things you don't understand," he said, his words a cryptic veil over truths unspoken. "Things I couldn't tell you before, but you need to know now. You have to protect them. Protect your family." The line crackled violently, and his voice slipped, turning into a garbled mess of sounds that tugged at my deepest fears. "Beware the storm," was all I caught before the connection was severed. The line going dead in my hand, the silence in its wake oppressive and cold. I stood there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear, my family's questions a distant hum. What did he mean? What was there to protect them from? I felt the walls of our home closing in, the storm outside now a tempest within. In the days that followed, the phone remained silent, but its presence was a constant reminder of that surreal night. I watched my family with a heightened awareness, searching for hidden threats, for shadows lurking in the corners of our lives. The storm had passed, but the unease lingered, wrapping around us like a shroud. And so, we continued with our lives, each interaction tinged with the knowledge of that call, the weight of my father's last message. We laughed, we fought, we navigated the mundane challenges each day presented, but always with a part of me on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The phone did ring again, now and then, but it was always mundane, tethered to reality. Yet every ring was a reminder of the voice that spoke from beyond, of the warnings it carried, and of my promise to protect them. It was a lingering fear, a ghost in the machine, whispering in the quiet moments, a specter in the guise of a ring. The first time I noticed the persistent ringing in my ear was on a chilly autumn morning. I had woken up to the usual comforting sounds of my neighborhood, the distant hum of traffic, the tentative chirping of birds, and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Yet beneath those familiar sounds was something else, something new. It was a barely perceptible ringing, like the faint chime of a distant bell. I dismissed it as remnants of sleep, a transient echo that would fade with the arrival of the day. Little did I know, it was the beginning of something I could never have anticipated. My life was ordinary, marked by routine and predictability. I worked as an accountant in a mid-sized firm, my days filled with numbers and spreadsheets. My evenings were spent at home with my wife Julia and our daughter Lily. We had a small house on the outskirts of town, a place where life moved at its own leisurely pace. It was a life that suited me, one that granted me solitude and serenity. The ringing persisted, becoming a companion that I neither invited nor wanted. It was always there, a constant presence that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. At work, I found it distracting, a background noise that made concentration difficult. At home, it was a nuisance, an intrusion into the peaceful silence of our evenings. I tried to ignore it, hoping it would disappear as mysteriously as it had arrived. Weeks passed, and the ringing grew louder, more insistent. It changed its pitch and frequency, a cacophony of sounds that made my head spin. I could no longer focus on my work. My thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind. My patience wore thin, and I found myself snapping at Julia and Lily over trivial matters. The ringing was becoming more than just a sound. It was a force, an entity that was reshaping my life. I sought help, visiting doctors who conducted tests and scans, yet found nothing. They suggested stress, fatigue, perhaps tinnitus. They prescribed medications that offered no relief, therapies that yielded no results. The ringing persisted, defying their attempts to silence it. I felt trapped, ensnared in a world where silence had been replaced by an unending symphony of torment. Then, one night, the first disturbance occurred. I woke from a fitful sleep to find myself standing at the foot of Lily's bed. I had no recollection of how I got there, my last memory being of lying beside Julia, drifting into slumber. Lily was fast asleep, her small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of her dreams. I returned to bed, disturbed by the oddity of my sleepwalking, and yet, as I lay there, the ringing in my ear seemed to take on a new quality. It was as though it were speaking to me, whispering secrets I could not decipher. The following nights, I began to hear something beyond the ringing, something woven into its fabric. It was a voice, barely discernible, a murmur at the edge of consciousness. It felt familiar, yet alien, like the voice of a long-lost relative. It spoke in fragments, disjointed phrases that made no sense. I strained to understand, to capture its meaning, but it eluded me, leaving only a residue of anxiety and unease. My sleepwalking continued, each time finding myself in a different part of the house. Once in the kitchen, standing before the refrigerator, another time in the living room, staring at the blank television screen. But always, I would end up at Lily's bedside, watching over her as she slept. Julia grew concerned, urging me to seek further medical advice, but I was resistant. I feared what they might say, what truths they might uncover. The escalation came not long after. The voice in the ringing grew louder, more distinct. It spoke of things that made my skin crawl, whispered of events that had never happened, or perhaps had, in a reality I was unaware of. Visions accompanied the voice, flashes of a life not my own. I saw a man, a stranger, yet one whose features were hauntingly familiar. I watched him walk through corridors lined with sterile white walls, his face a mask of despair. He would pause, listening, just as I did, to a sound that only he could hear. The sensation of being watched grew with each passing day. I would catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, shadows that vanished as soon as I turned to look. Objects in the house would shift, subtly, as though rearranged by unseen hands. Julia noticed too, questioning me about misplaced items, about the strange occurrences that had begun to plague our lives. It was during one of those restless nights that the climax occurred. I awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, the ringing in my ear now a roar. The voice was clearer than ever, speaking with urgency, desperation. It begged, pleaded with me to understand, to act. I stumbled out of bed, the floor cold beneath my feet, and followed the invisible thread that pulled me through the house. I found myself once more at Lily's bedside. She lay there, serene and untouched by the chaos that had enveloped our world. The voice reached a crescendo, revealing to me a truth I could scarcely comprehend. It was the voice of a father, a man whose child had been taken from him in the sterile corridors of a hospital. A man who had sought justice, who had cried out for retribution, but had found none. The ringing was his call, his message, carried across time and space to my ear. It was then that I understood the purpose of my nocturnal wanderings, the reason I was drawn to Lily. The man in the visions, the father, was using me, guiding me to protect my daughter from a fate akin to his own. I was to be the vessel of his revenge, the instrument of his justice. But how, I wondered, could I fulfill such a role? What threat loomed over my child that required such drastic intervention? The answer came, not in words, but in a sudden, undeniable instinct. I needed to leave, to take my family away from this place, from whatever malevolent force had set its sights on us. Julia, though skeptical, trusted my judgment, sensing the urgency in my plea. We packed quickly, gathering only the essentials, and left our home behind, seeking refuge in a place unknown to the man who haunted my dreams. Yet, as we drove through the night, the ringing in my ear persisted, a constant reminder of the unfinished business that lay behind us. It was softer now, tempered by distance, but still present, a lingering echo of the voice that had guided me. I wondered if we had truly escaped, or merely postponed the inevitable. In the days that followed, we settled into our new surroundings, a small town nestled in the embrace of mountains. Life regained a semblance of normalcy, the routine I so craved slowly re-establishing itself. The ringing, though ever present, was no longer intrusive, a background hum that I had learned to coexist with. But the fear remained, a shadow lurking at the edges of my consciousness. What if the voice returned, more insistent, more demanding? What if the threat it had warned of found us once more? I carried these questions with me, a burden that weighed heavily on my soul. One evening, as I sat on the porch, listening to the chirp of crickets and the rustling of leaves, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to listen, truly listen, to the ringing. The voice was there, subdued but persistent, a whisper on the wind. I felt a strange comfort in its presence, an acknowledgement of our shared purpose, our common cause. Perhaps, I mused, the voice would never leave, a permanent reminder of the connection between our worlds. I had become the guardian of my own child and, in some inexplicable way, the avenger of another's. The thought was unsettling, yet oddly reassuring, a paradox I found myself coming to terms with. In the end, the ringing in my ear was more than just a sound. It was a bridge, an unseen thread that linked two fathers across time and space. It had brought with it fear and confusion, but also a grim understanding, a resolve to protect what was dearest to me at any cost. As I sat there, embraced by the night, I realized that the true horror lay not in the supernatural, but in the depths of a father's love and the lengths one would go to honor it. As days turned to weeks, I remained vigilant, ever watchful for signs of the unseen menace that had once invaded our lives. The ordinary rhythms of our existence resumed, but beneath them lay an undercurrent of vigilance, a readiness to act should the need arise. The ringing, now a familiar presence, served as both a warning and a guide, a duality I had come to accept. And so, life continued, as it always does, marked by small joys and quiet sorrows, by moments of blissful ignorance and others of stark clarity. I grew accustomed to the burden I bore, a weight that had become as much a part of me as the air I breathed. The ringing was my companion, my confidant, a constant reminder of the fragility of the world I had fought to preserve. Yet even as I settled into this uneasy peace, a part of me remained on edge, attuned to the slightest hint of change. I knew that the world was full of mysteries I could never hope to understand, forces beyond my comprehension that shaped our destinies in ways unknown, but I also knew that I was not alone, that across the vast chasm of time, another father watched and waited, his presence a ghostly echo in the symphony of sound that filled my ear. In the end, the story of the ringing in my ear is one of connection, of bonds forged in the crucible of shared experience. It is a tale of fear and courage, of love and loss, and of the invisible threads that bind us to one another in ways we can scarcely fathom. As I walk through the days of my life, I carry this story with me, etched into the fabric of my being, a testament to the enduring power of a father's love and the haunting melody of the unknown. Growing up in the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, Alabama, I always knew there was something peculiar about my family, something unspoken, yet ever present. Our lives were just like any other family on the surface. We lived in a modest house on the edge of town, surrounded by whispering pines and cotton fields that stretched beyond the horizon. My father, a gruff yet kind-hearted man, worked hard as a mechanic, while my mother tended to our home with the meticulous care of a gardener, nurturing her blooming flowers. My sister, Lily, and I would often spend our afternoons playing in the fields, the sun casting long shadows as we chased each other until we collapsed in laughter. But there was something else, a mystery that lingered like the dense fog that often rolled in from the nearby swamps. Every month, without fail, my father would take a trip deep into the woods, always carrying with him a small black envelope. I once asked my mother about it, curious as any 10-year-old would be, but her response was an evasive smile and a gentle reminder that some things were best left unquestioned. It was a ritual shrouded in secrecy, and I grew to accept it as just another facet of our peculiar family life. It wasn't until I turned 16 that the first disturbance shattered the illusion of normalcy. It was a humid July evening, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the distant rumble of an approaching storm. My father had set out on his monthly journey, the black envelope clutched tightly in his hand. I watched from my bedroom window as he disappeared into the twilight, his figure swallowed by the darkness of the forest. That night, a restless energy filled the house. I tossed and turned in my bed, unable to shake the feeling that something was amiss. A sudden clap of thunder jolted me upright, my heart racing as an inexplicable fear gripped me. I crept downstairs, drawn by an invisible force, and found myself standing at the back door, staring into the inky blackness beyond. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Just within the tree line, I saw a figure, not my father's sturdy silhouette, but something else. It was tall and thin, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It watched me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine, and then, as abruptly as it appeared, it vanished into the night, leaving me breathless and trembling. I didn't mention the encounter to anyone, not even Lily, who would have dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. But the image of those eyes haunted me, a lingering shadow that refused to fade. I began to notice small changes around the house, strange noises in the night, an unsettling chill that seemed to seep from the walls, and whispers that echoed through the halls when no one else was around. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. My father's monthly trips seemed to weigh heavier on him, each return marked by a deepened crease on his brow and an exhaustion that no amount of sleep could remedy. He became withdrawn, speaking less and less at the dinner table, his eyes haunted by a burden I couldn't comprehend. One evening, as I sat in my room attempting to focus on my homework, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, carrying with them a sense of urgency that set my nerves on edge. I closed my books and followed the sound, tracing it down the hallway to my father's study, a room that was strictly off limits to Lily and me. The door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the dim hallway. I hesitated, knowing I was about to cross a line, but curiosity and fear propelled me forward. Inside, the room was cluttered with papers and tools, an organized chaos that reflected my father's methodical mind. On his desk sat the black envelope, its presence as ominous as ever. I approached cautiously, my fingers hovering over the smooth surface. Before I could succumb to the temptation to open it, a sudden draft swept through the room, extinguishing the single lamp and plunging me into darkness. I froze, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin as the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise ceased and the light returned. I stood alone in the room, the envelope undisturbed. The unmistakable feeling that I was not alone gripped me, and I fled back to the safety of my bedroom, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. The climax of these disturbances came one fateful night in early November. The air was crisp, and the first hints of winter were creeping into the southern landscape. My father had left for his monthly pilgrimage, his face drawn with an anxiety that was becoming all too familiar. I waited, as always, by my window, hoping against hope that this time he would return without incident. As the hours stretched on, a restless unease settled over the house. Midnight came and went, and still there was no sign of him. I paced the length of my room, my mind a whirlwind of worry and fear. It was then that I heard it, a soft, rhythmic knocking at the front door. I crept downstairs, each step echoing loudly in the silence, and peered out the window. There, standing on the porch, was the figure from the woods, its eyes burning with a malevolent light. It was taller than I remembered, its presence casting a shadow that seemed to engulf the entire house. The knocking continued, insistent and unwavering. I knew instinctively that opening the door would be a mistake, that whatever was outside was not of this world. Yet a perverse curiosity kept me rooted to the spot, torn between the urge to flee and the compulsion to confront the unknown. Suddenly, the knocking stopped, replaced by a voice, a deep guttural sound that resonated with an unnatural timbre. It spoke my name, each syllable dripping with a dark promise that sent a chill through my very soul. "Your time has come," it intoned, a declaration as chilling as the grave. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, my hands fumbling for the lock. But before I could secure it, the door swung open of its own accord, revealing the figure in all its terrifying glory. Its gaze bore into me, and I felt a pull, a magnetic force drawing me towards it. In that moment, I understood. The black envelope, the monthly trips, the growing tension. It was all part of a bargain, a contract my father had made with this entity. And now, it seemed, the debt was due, and my soul was the price. With a final, desperate effort, I tore myself away from its grasp and slammed the door shut, the sound reverberating through the house like a gunshot. The presence outside faded, leaving behind an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow everything in its wake. When my father finally returned, his face ashen and his eyes hollow, I confronted him. The truth spilled out in halting words, a confession soaked in remorse and regret. Years ago, in a moment of desperation, he had struck a deal with the creature, promising a soul in exchange for prosperity and protection for his family. He had hoped to renegotiate, to find another way. But the entity was relentless, and my fate was sealed from the beginning. The weight of his words crushed me, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet as the world as I knew it crumbled away. The deal with the devil was not just a story whispered by candlelight. It was my reality, a chain that bound me to a destiny I never asked for. In the days that followed, the presence lingered at the edges of my perception, a constant reminder of the pact that governed my life. I could feel its eyes watching me, waiting patiently for the moment when I would finally succumb. The once vibrant colors of the world faded to a muted gray, and the laughter that used to fill our home was replaced by a heavy silence. Yet, despite the dread that clung to me like a second skin, I resolved to fight back. I delved into the lore and legends of our town, seeking any knowledge that could offer a glimpse of hope. I discovered stories of those who had managed to outwit the devil, tales of cleverness and sacrifice that rekindled a flicker of defiance within me. Still, the path was fraught with uncertainty, and each day was a test of endurance against the encroaching darkness. I learned to live with the fear, to carry it with me as a constant companion, but never to let it define me. My father, burdened by his guilt, became my ally, aiding me in my clandestine quest for salvation. And so, life continued in its strange, haunting rhythm. The forest, once a place of solace and adventure, became a boundary I dared not cross. The black envelope still made its monthly journey, but now I understood the true cost of its contents. Our house, with its peeling paint and creaking floors, stood as a monument to the choices and mistakes that shaped our lives. Though the presence at the door remains a specter that haunts my nights, I cling to the hope that someday I will find a way to break the cycle, to free myself and my family from the chains of a deal forged in shadows. Until then, I carry on, each day a testament to resilience and the enduring power of hope against the encroaching darkness. In the heart of Alabama, where the air is thick with humidity and the cicadas sing their eternal song, I grew up in a house that carried more secrets than it did people. Situated on the outskirts of a small town, the old Victorian home with its peeling paint and creaky wooden floors was our family's legacy. It stood like a sentinel amongst the oaks, whose twisted branches reached out like gnarled fingers. Inside those walls, life was a pattern of simple routines, and until a certain age, I believed our lives were as ordinary as anyone else's. My father, a man of few words, was the kind of man who embraced the predictability of routine. Every morning he'd leave for work in his weathered pickup and return just after dusk, nodding at my mother, who would be setting the table for dinner. It was an unspoken rule that each meal began with a prayer, not out of piety, but habit. My father's voice would rumble low over our heads as my mother stiffened her spine, hands clasped in her lap. And yet, there was one exception to our routine that I didn't quite understand until I was older. Once a month, my father would retreat into his study, a small room at the back of the house that smelled of old books and cigar smoke. He would lock the door behind him, leaving my mother and me to our own devices for the evening. I'd sometimes press my ear against the door, hoping to catch a fragment of a conversation or the shuffle of paper, but there was nothing. The silence from within was impenetrable, as if he'd stepped into another world entirely. It wasn't until I turned 12 that the first ripple appeared on the calm surface of our lives. It began on the evening my father emerged from his study with a look of such intensity that it sent shivers down my spine. His eyes, usually steady and kind, were wide and wild. He clutched a black envelope in his hand tightly, so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Wordlessly, he slipped past us and out into the night, leaving the front door swinging open. Curiosity gnawed at me until I crept outside, careful not to alert my mother. I watched as he strode purposefully to the edge of our property, where the woods loomed dark and foreboding. There, he paused, standing as still as a statue. I held my breath, sensing something was amiss. The air felt different, charged with an energy that was both alluring and terrifying. A figure emerged from the shadows then, cloaked in darkness so profound it seemed to absorb the very light around it. My heart pounded in my chest, and I ducked behind a tree. My father extended the black envelope, and the figure accepted it with a slow, deliberate movement. A low murmur passed between them, a language that was both foreign and familiar, like the whisper of wind through leaves. I strained to hear, but the words eluded me, slipping away like slippery fish from a net. That night, I lay awake in bed, questions whirring through my mind. What was in the envelope, and who or what was the shadowy figure that accepted it? These thoughts wrapped around me like a cocoon of unease, and as days turned into weeks, the questions only grew. The next month, when my father once again locked himself in his study, I was ready. I had to know the truth behind the black envelope. Waiting until the house was quiet and my mother had retired to her room, I tiptoed to the study door, tools in hand. The lock was old and rusty, and after a few tense minutes, I heard the satisfying click as the door swung open. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single lamp on the desk. Papers were strewn across the surface, and in the center lay the black envelope. My heart raced as I approached it, half expecting some unseen force to stop me. But nothing happened. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. It was unmarked and sealed with black wax. I was about to open it when a noise from outside startled me. Hastily, I returned the envelope to its place and slipped out, closing the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my father's footsteps as he once again ventured into the woods. The events of the night replayed in my mind like a scene from a film, each detail more vivid than the last. As the months passed, the atmosphere in the house changed. My father, once a figure of stability, became increasingly withdrawn. He spent more time in his study, emerging with shadows under his eyes and a tension that never seemed to dissipate. My mother noticed too, but said nothing, her silence more telling than words. It was as if we were all bound by some unspoken agreement to maintain the facade, even as the ground shifted beneath our feet. The truth of the situation struck with the force of a lightning bolt one stiflingly hot summer night. My father had left for his monthly meeting, the black envelope clutched in his hand. Unable to resist, I followed at a cautious distance. This time, I was determined to remain undetected, to see the exchange without interference. As I crept closer, my foot caught on a root, and I stumbled, letting out a gasp. The figures in the clearing turned towards me, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. My father's eyes met mine, and the look of despair on his face was like a punch to the gut. The shadowy figure, now more clearly visible, turned its attention to me. Its eyes glowed a deep, unsettling red, and a cold dread washed over me. Before I could react, the creature spoke, its voice a low rumble that echoed in my bones. "The child knows," it intoned, each word resonating with an ancient power. My father stood frozen, torn between his duty and his family. "What do you want from us?" I shouted, my voice breaking the stillness like a thrown stone breaking the surface of a pond. The figure regarded me with a gaze that seemed to penetrate my very soul. "A pact was made long ago," it replied. "An envelope for your family's safety, but the terms, they change." Its voice was a melody of menace and inevitability. I looked at my father, who seemed smaller, frailer than ever before. "What is this?" I demanded. "Why are you doing this?" He took a deep breath, and the words tumbled out, a confession wrapped in regret. "It was your grandfather's doing," he began, voice heavy with sorrow. "He made a deal to protect our family, to keep our land. But the price was eternal." The realization hit me like a physical blow. We were chained to this darkness by the decisions of the past, bound to appease a malevolent entity that thrived on our fear and submission. The world around me spun, and I struggled to make sense of it all. The shadowy figure remained steadfast, an eternal sentinel of our fate. My father's shoulders slumped, and he whispered, "There must be another way." The entity's laughter filled the clearing, a sound without warmth or joy. "There is no escape," it declared, "only the continuation of the pact, or its end." I stood there, feeling the weight of generations pressing down upon me. The forest around us seemed to hold its breath, waiting for my decision. I knew then that the cycle had to break, that the burden of this curse could not be allowed to pass to another. Summoning every ounce of courage, I stepped forward. "If the pact ends, what happens?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. The figure's eyes glinted with something like amusement. "You lose everything," it said simply, "but you will be free." I looked at my father, his face etched with lines of worry and love, and something inside me shifted. I couldn't bear the thought of this shadow hanging over us any longer. "Then let it end," I declared, heart pounding with the enormity of the decision. Silence reigned in the clearing, and for a moment the air was still. Then slowly, the figure inclined its head. "So be it," it intoned, and just like that, the weight of centuries began to lift. The figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving us alone beneath the whispering trees. My father sank to his knees, and I rushed to his side, enveloping him in a hug. The world seemed brighter somehow, the oppressive darkness receding. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter. Our home became a place of healing rather than secrets, and the oppressive air that had clung to it for so long began to disperse. My father, though haunted by the past, was free from the shackles of his ancestors' choices. My mother, too, found a new lightness in her step, her laughter no longer tinged with sorrow. Yet, even as we moved beyond the shadow of the past, a lingering fear remained. It whispered in the quiet moments, a reminder of what once was, of what could have been. I often found myself gazing into the woods, half expecting to see the figure watching, waiting, but it never appeared again, leaving behind only the echoes of its presence. We rebuilt our lives, piece by piece, forging a future unbound by ancient pacts. And while the memory of those nights lingered, I found solace in the knowledge that we had chosen freedom over fear, that we had broken the cycle that had held us captive. In the end, it wasn't the darkness that defined us, but the courage to face it, to confront the unknown and emerge on the other side, forever changed, but undeniably free. The Bowhill Forest was a place of whispered tales and unspoken secrets, stretching for miles of dense, shadowy woodlands. It was here that my family had chosen to settle, drawn by the allure of isolation and a chance to start anew. Our house, a sprawling relic of the past, lay nestled at the forest's edge, its weathered stone walls emerging from the earth like the bones of some ancient beast. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where echoes of the past lingered in the corners of every room. Life in the countryside was a quiet symphony of cicadas and rustling leaves, far removed from the clamor of city life. Our days began with the soft hum of morning light filtering through thick curtains, and our nights were punctuated by the distant hoot of owls and the gentle whisper of wind through the trees. My parents, in their search for tranquility, appeared to have found their paradise. My sister Amelia and I, however, felt an undercurrent of something unspoken beneath the surface of this idyllic existence, a subtle dissonance that tainted the air we breathed. The first disturbance came on a day like any other. The sky was a perfect blue, the sun a golden beacon in the heavens. Amelia and I had been exploring the outskirts of the forest, chasing shadows and playing games that had no rules. As we wandered back toward the house, a strange sight caught our attention. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, barely visible amongst the trees. It was a fleeting glimpse, a silhouette that seemed to dissolve into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. We exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if what we had seen was real or a trick of the light. That evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon, I noticed an unusual tension in the air. My parents, usually so calm and composed, seemed on edge. Their voices were hushed over dinner, their eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the darkness. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, but the unease settled deep within me, a seed of doubt that refused to be uprooted. Days turned into weeks, and the presence of that shadowy figure lingered like a specter in my mind. I began to notice other peculiarities, subtle shifts in the fabric of our daily life. My father's late-night escapades into the basement, the soft murmur of voices that seemed to emanate from the walls, and the locked door at the end of the hallway that was always kept firmly shut. Amelia and I dared not speak of these things, but I could see the same questions mirrored in her eyes. One night, curiosity overcame my apprehension. While the house lay silent under the cloak of darkness, I crept from my bed and made my way down the creaking stairs. The air was thick with anticipation as I approached the basement door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm in my chest. The latch was cold beneath my fingers as I turned it, the door swinging open with a reluctant groan. The basement was a cavern of shadows, the contours of the room obscured by a veil of darkness. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, my breath caught in my throat. But something compelled me to descend, drawn by an invisible thread that wound tighter with each step. The air grew colder as I reached the bottom, the scent of damp stone and earth filling my nostrils. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak yellow light that barely penetrated the gloom. The room was cluttered with forgotten furniture, stacks of old newspapers, and crates filled with mysterious contents. In the corner, half hidden behind a tattered sheet, was a door I had never seen before. It was unremarkable, save for the heavy padlock that secured it, a silent guardian to whatever lay beyond. My fingers traced the outline of the lock, its cold surface a chilling reminder of the secrets kept hidden from us. As I stood there, a strange sensation washed over me, a prickling at the base of my skull, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. I turned, half expecting to see the shadow from the forest standing behind me. The basement was empty, but the sensation persisted, an omnipresent awareness that refused to fade. Returning to my room, I found Amelia awake, her eyes wide, with the same fear that now gripped me. We spoke in whispers, our voices barely audible over the pounding of our hearts. There was something in the house, something our parents were hiding, and it was up to us to uncover the truth. The days that followed were marked by a growing tension, a silent game of cat and mouse between us and the unseen presence that lurked in the shadows. We watched our parents closely, noting every odd glance, every hurried conversation that ceased when we entered the room. The locked door at the end of the hall became an obsession, its secrets a tantalizing mystery we were desperate to unravel. One afternoon, while our parents were out, Amelia and I seized the opportunity to explore. We approached the locked door with trepidation, our hearts a wild symphony of anticipation and fear. The door was solid, its surface worn smooth by years of contact. We tried the handle, half hoping it might give way, but it held firm. Frustration bubbled within us, a tide of impatience that threatened to overwhelm. As we turned away, defeated, a soft creak echoed through the hallway. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable in the heavy silence. We froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. The creak came again, this time accompanied by a soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from behind the door. We exchanged a look of mutual understanding, a silent agreement to retreat for now and plan our next move. Whatever was behind that door, it was alive, and it was aware of us. The escalation was subtle, a series of small incidents that, when pieced together, painted a picture of mounting dread. Our parents' behavior grew more erratic, their patience with us wearing thin. We found ourselves under constant watch, their eyes scrutinizing our every action. The freedom we had once enjoyed was slowly eroding, replaced by an invisible cage that closed in tighter with each passing day. Driven by desperation, Amelia and I devised a plan. We would wait for the cover of night, for the moment when the house lay still and silent, and we would uncover the truth hidden behind the locked door. Armed with a makeshift toolkit of hairpins and determination, we set our plan into motion. The night was oppressive, the stars hidden behind a shroud of clouds. We moved silently through the house, our footsteps a careful whisper against the hardwood floors. The door loomed before us, a sentry that barred our path to discovery. My hands trembled as I worked the lock, the hairpins bending and twisting under the strain. With a soft click, the lock yielded, the door swinging open with a reluctant moan. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and an underlying musk that set my teeth on edge. We hesitated, our courage faltering in the face of the unknown. But we had come too far to turn back. Steeling ourselves, we descended into the depths, the shadows closing in around us like a living entity. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor stretched before us, a claustrophobic passageway that seemed to extend into eternity. The tapping sound was louder here, a steady rhythm that pulled us onward. We moved cautiously, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of the fragility of our situation. The corridor ended in another door, this one unlocked and slightly ajar. We exchanged a final glance, nerves frayed and hearts pounding, and pushed it open. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. It was starkly lit, the walls lined with shelves filled with old books and strange artifacts. In the center of the room was a crude altar, and beyond it, shackled to the wall, was a figure that should not have existed. The resemblance was unmistakable. The figure was a mirror image of my father, gaunt and unkempt, his eyes wild with fury and despair. The sight was a jarring collision of reality and nightmare, a moment frozen in time that shattered the illusion of our lives. Before we could react, the door behind us slammed shut, the sound reverberating through the room like a death knell. Panic surged through me, my mind grappling with the impossibility of what I was witnessing. The figure on the wall, our true father, began to speak, his voice a broken whisper that echoed in the silence. He spoke of betrayal, of a brother who had taken his place, a stranger who had wormed his way into our lives and stolen everything he held dear. The tapping sound, he explained, was his desperate attempt to communicate with us, to warn us of the danger that lurked within our home. With a newfound resolve, Amelia and I worked to free him from his bonds, our hands moving with a frantic urgency. The air was charged with an unspoken fear, a knowledge that our time was running out. No sooner had we freed him than the impostor appeared, his face a mask of fury and desperation. In that moment, the house seemed to come alive, the walls closing in as the shadows deepened into an impenetrable void. The confrontation that followed was a blur of movement and sound, a cacophony of fear and defiance that reverberated through the very foundation of our home. In the end, it was the truth that set us free. The impostor, faced with the undeniable reality of his deceit, crumbled beneath the weight of his own lies. He fled into the night, leaving behind a trail of shattered illusions and unanswered questions. In the weeks that followed, the house slowly began to heal. My father, though scarred by his ordeal, gradually returned to us, his presence a comforting balm on our wounded hearts. But the shadows that had once loomed so large never entirely vanished. They lingered in the corners of our vision, a reminder of the fragility of our lives, the thin veil that separated us from the unknown. The forest, once a place of mystery and allure, now held a different kind of fascination. The trees whispered secrets in a language only they understood, their branches reaching skyward like bony fingers, grasping for the heavens. The figure in the woods, it seemed, had been a warning, a harbinger of the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface. Though the immediate danger had passed, the fear remained, a constant companion that walked with us through the corridors of our minds. We spoke little of what had transpired, choosing instead to focus on the present, on the life we had rebuilt from the ashes of deception. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the trees and the shadows danced across the walls, I felt the presence of the forest, its silent vigil, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the light. It was a darkness that could never be fully banished, only understood and, in time, accepted. For in the heart of Bowhill, where the ancient trees stood as silent witnesses to the passage of time, I had learned a truth that would guide me through the shadows of my own existence. That the greatest horrors are not those that come from without, but those that lie hidden within. And it is only through the light of understanding that we can hope to conquer them.